we wanted to do it in your office once, David could bring the equipment.
Okay.
I mean, we can live stream from just about anywhere, as long as we have an internet connection.
I'm in.
So I think it'd be awesome to do. We got 3 minutes. Sound seems to be working.
Yep. I'm muted on the Zoom side.
Yep. And we got 2 different looks, which is good, but common cameras.
Perfect. No, that's a great setup.
And now my phone's buzzing. Frankfurt, Michigan. We'll let that go to voicemail. Got my questions here. Yep, we're live on YouTube too.
Sweet.
Everything's a working. In fact, I'll pull up YouTube on my phone, so if anybody comments there. Oh, it's the sound is picking up.
Oh, that's because we are.
And we are live for our Qualigence live event. And I've got with me attorney James Reid. Thank you, James, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to share our perspectives.
So to all the viewers out there, so we are not only on Zoom, if you are on Zoom, we are on Facebook, we are on Instagram, we are on Twitter. We're going live just about everywhere, with the exception of LinkedIn. We're not live on LinkedIn yet, but we're trying to get there. But we will post a copy of this video up on LinkedIn.
We need to be on LinkedIn next time.
So let me do some house cleaning work first. If you're on Zoom, and I would encourage you, if you have questions, if you have comments, to go ahead and post. I've got David over here monitoring Zoom. I've got Facebook in front of me, Facebook Live. So if you're watching live there and you have questions, definitely do that. This is an interesting dialogue, James. We've had some precursors to this conversation, but we've got companies that need to go back to work. We've got employees that need to go back to work.
Right.
But we got a lot of crazy stuff going on right now. We've got COVID happening. We've got the protests happening. And I think both of those need to be taken into consideration as we've talked before.
There's going to be a lot of dynamics, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and we're going to disagree on the best approach for under certain scenarios.
And I think that's important, because the other thing that's happening that I've noticed is, even before all this happened, it seemed like employees, team members, were getting kind of perturbed with their leadership.
Right.
Like, is it all about profits? What about us, the little guys, and all this? Which is now spilled over to some of the protests and all kinds of other. So I think there's a bigger dynamic here.
Loyalty has been lost at companies for about a decade. Ever since 2008, I think employees wanted to get their employers back and are now ghosting employers and moving jobs to make $1 more an hour.
So do you think what do you think the original cause was of all this?
I think the original cause was employers were not even responding to applicants when they apply at jobs.
So it's starting all the way there.
I think it's starting all the way back there. I think there's been a decade kind of perception that it's all about big business first. It's not about the employees, and employees don't have loyalty. It's not, I'm going to be at the same company for 30 years and get a pension. It's, I'm better off job hopping. A SHRM statistic said that the average person is now going to have 32 jobs, different employers, over their lifetime, and the average job will only be held 18 months going forward.
So let me ask a question that I know people are, depending on where if they're the employee or the employer,
Yes.
right? Do you think that's true? Do you think employers really took their teams for granted back then? Or do you think it's just a perception that's, people talk about a lot, it's in the media a lot, so it gets everybody kind of worked up into a froth?
Yeah, I think there's a hybrid approach. I think people weren't aware of the job opportunities back in the day when you didn't have your network, your resources, your social media job postings. So, and I think it used to be tainted. If you have 3 jobs on your resume, you have to be embarrassed. Why did you hop 3 times? Does everyone hate you? What did you do wrong?
Yeah.
Where I feel like now it's starting to be the new normal. People are now realizing, I got some great experience here, but I can get more experience over here.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing to me. I mean, even in our organization, if somebody hits a plateau and I can't keep driving them to grow here,
Right.
I'd rather they go somewhere else.
I think that's a great point. A lot of companies say, I don't want to give them all of the skill set or these leads because they might go somewhere else. But the flip side is, what if you don't train them at all and they stay? What are they going to be able to do for you?
Train them so well they can leave, treat them so well that they stay.
That's what needs to happen. But I do think a lot of employers put someone in a job and don't actually show them with transparency their career path at this company. They might feel stuck at that spot forever, or believe everyone above them is going to stay above them forever. So I do, especially me, I want to be at a place where I can actually elevate and not wait in line if I'm ready.
So you bring up actually a good point there, because I just had this discussion with a number of members of my team. What we tend to do, and tell me if you buy into this, is that we say, okay, here's your 3 career paths within an organization. Sure. We have this structured career progression. But what if it's more of a, you can select from these 3 even though none of these 3 actually match what you want to do in the future? Now what happens? You pigeonhole them into one of those 3 paths, when really, I think as leaders, we ought to be saying, okay, I can give you some skills now. I can get you to this level based on where you want to go.
Right.
And then you may have to leave, or there might be other opportunities. But do you think we're pigeonholing too many of our folks by creating false paths beforehand?
Definitely. We are pigeonholing our employees. The job descriptions are horrendous. I think there's this is HR's time to shine. HR needs to not just post the job that someone tells them to post. They actually need to dig a little deeper and say, what is that person really looking for? And it could be a completely different job duties, and the job description has to change, and what you think is a VP of sales might mean something completely different at various companies.
Okay, so you're an attorney.
Yes.
For anybody watching, James is a longtime attorney.
I've been since 2004. I was the intern at a law firm. Yep.
Yeah, and here we are in 2020, and now you're partner with Dinsmore.
Correct.
So, and that just happened recently.
This year, I switched to a national law firm, so we had resources coast to coast.
Okay, so let's talk about job descriptions, because you brought them up, and then we will get to COVID and the protests here in just a second, because they're all tied in.
Yeah.
But it's HR leaders that I talk to, folks in TA that I talk to, are deathly afraid to adjust their job descriptions for legal reasons. They're afraid of putting the wrong thing in because somebody will sue them because they said 5 years of experience, but they hired somebody with 4 years of experience. What's your take on that?
I think doing nothing is more dangerous, because you're going to have something in there like, this person does that, and it turns out they're no longer doing something on their job description. So when you want to enforce the job description and say you're not doing this, they can say there's a bunch of false fluff in there. That job description means nothing, and it loses all of its merit. So to give you an example, there was a lawyer, the job description said they go to court.
Okay.
The lawyer said, I haven't been to court in 3 years, so by you refusing my request to work remotely the rest of my life would be unreasonable, because that's just a false job duty you have in there, so we can't even use that as evidence as a reason where I should be in the office or be outside of the
Oh
home.
my gosh, talking about nitpicking, right?
And nitpicking. So I think job descriptions are not caught up to case law. So
What do you mean?
So let me give you an example. Do you need to have interpersonal skills to do your job? And that's a buzzword for working with other people.
Sure.
And if you don't have that in your job description, maybe they can work remotely the rest of their life. So you have to update it with key phrases to actually show they need to be at work. It used to be assumed attendance at work was an essential function of the job, but in this new normal,
Maybe not.
maybe not.
So a couple of things on that. One, go back for a second. Job descriptions are notorious for having years of experience on them.
Yes, I saw your post the other day. Does experience mean that you're a better candidate?
What's your take from a legal perspective?
Well, it's a common thing I still see on a lot of job postings.
Don't they have to be on job postings?
The reason why people do it, by the way, is what someone wants is someone probably at a certain age range. I want somebody that is hungry in their 20s to 30s. I don't want somebody that is maybe in their 60s or 70s applying for a job. And you're not allowed to say age ever. So if you say years of experience, you're kind of, in a way, getting what some employers are looking for without violating any age laws. But I agree with you, just because you have 20 years of experience, but your company was not well qualified or didn't have great training, that 20 years of experience could make you worse than someone with no experience that's going to start fresh and learn all the right things right away.
Yeah, I look at it it's not what's worse, but I look at it who's potentially better. And the case I made online a couple days ago was, look, if you learn, and my guess is you learn a lot faster than me because you got your JD, right? Okay, if you learn in 2 years what took me 10 years, but the job description says 8 years plus,
Right.
am I missing a great candidate like you?
Definitely.
Now, but are there any legal restrictions to job descriptions, specifically here in Michigan where we are, but I think it probably goes everywhere else, that requires you to put years of experience?
No.
None.
None.
So I have no legal issue, because that's the number one complaint I hear from HR folks is, legally I have to have years of experience on my job description.
No, it's not true at all.
So what started this mess?
It's really, I think, the age. People are afraid to get age information, so they have another way of doing it. But I agree with you that, the takeaway is, don't limit your years of experience to 8 plus or 10 plus. Basically 2 or more would likely be common. But I'm seeing the reverse. I'm seeing a lot of people applying for a job where they only want 0 to 4 years of experience.
For that younger person.
For that next generation that they want to develop.
Yeah, that seems so short-sighted to me too. Because
Yeah.
I want the best. Most employers, I think, want the best. I would hope that you're watching, you want the best. But I think it's going to be more related as people come back to work. They're looking at this and going, crap, can I apply for that or can I not apply for that? Right? I mean, to your point, it's a new norm, right?
Well, I think the other challenge is there's economics involved. So if you were to say 0 to 4, that kind of gives a signal that it's going to be a lower paying job. And if you say 10 plus, it signals you're going to be paying more money. And so that 2-year applicant isn't going to probably get the 10-year applicant pay. And there's a lot of states that are making it more illegal to ask somebody how much money they made at their current job.
Well, so let's just, in my theory, tell me if this makes any sense to you from a legal perspective, get rid of years of experience, get rid of the years of experience on comp bands, because it's directly on most companies' comp bands, and pay for results. Just pay for, if you do this, you'll get paid this. If you can do deliver these 5 things, here's the comp range for it, regardless of years of experience.
I love that, but I think you and I are not the norm. We're both trying to do things, I guess, above and beyond what we're required to do. So the issue is, I think a lot of people want to have that safety net of a guaranteed salary regardless of performance. And you and I are, in a way, we're in sales. So we're willing to take that risk and work hard and have our performance rewarded, where I think that we're the unicorns. I don't think that's the mass.
We got to get more of that. So let's continue on this, because one of the things we put out there for the people watching was people returning to work. This is a big issue right now.
Right.
We've got the scare of COVID, which is a real scare. Regardless of what your political affiliation is, it's real and people have died. We can't throw that out there. But yet we need to get back to work. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur, right? I want my people back to work. Now we're going fully remote almost. So that's not an issue, but a lot of companies can't do that.
Right.
This is now opening up significant legal issues to contend with for the company, for the employer, for the owner, or the whatever. So give me your take. We've talked about this a lot. And you brought up some case things that are going on that I was shocked that were even happening regarding
You're
this.
right. So every time there's a change, and whether it's legal or any just change in America, there will be new creative lawsuits. And some are in good faith, but from my experience, a majority are taking advantage of an opportunity.
So give me an example of some of this stuff, because literally my jaw dropped, I think, when you were telling me some of the stories related to COVID, and then I want to address the protest thing too.
Absolutely. So I'm seeing a range. Someone will conveniently say that they think they're developing a cough, so they want to take off the next 2 weeks. And then,
okay, we're 5 feet apart
5 feet
here.
apart.
We're good.
And then they're 6 feet apart, right? and then they end up being in Traverse City for 2 weeks, posting on social media, in a parade, in crowds with other people, and obviously they're using it as a way to get a 2-week paid vacation under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. For companies under 500 employees, you can pay them for 80 hours full pay when they are, diagnosed or seeking a diagnosis and quarantining.
Okay, so let's address that last piece.
Yeah.
So I had somebody who was COVID positive.
Yes.
Took 2 weeks off, didn't ask any questions. But as an employer, can I legally ask did you really have it? I want to see a doctor's note.
Great question. So normally you're not allowed to ask an employee their diagnosis, and usually you're not even allowed to ask the employee what their temperature is or even screen them. So there's this limited time frame during a state of emergency or a pandemic where in order to promote safety, you can kind of put on hold the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission guidelines, ADA, and other rights are kind of second chair to that information. But I attended a webinar yesterday, and in Macomb County and in Oakland County, they declared they're no longer under a state of emergency.
Really?
They have everything under control. So the question is, with Governor Whitmer, how long will the state of emergency stay in place? It's currently extended to August 16th.
Oh boy.
So what happens after August 16th? Will it be extended if things are under control?
So what supersedes in that case, where they're saying it's not a state of emergency, the state is saying, and I assume this is similar for any state in union, what supersedes what, or do we not know yet?
So typically when there are different laws overlapping at the same time, whatever's the more strict applies. So because we're in a state of emergency, that's still in effect throughout the entire state. And they said they're not necessarily disagreeing with Governor Whitmer. They're just saying their own county is good. Maybe a different county
is not. Okay.
So
so right now then, given that, if I wanted to ask somebody, I want to see a doctor's note saying that you need to be home in COVID or whatever, and you can't work, I'm kind of okay.
You're kind of okay. It's still a gray area. So the Department of Labor doesn't really want you saying, show me what your diagnosis, all your results are.
Okay.
What they would rather you do is you can require someone to take a COVID test.
Okay.
And you can require the doctor to give that employee a return to work note.
Got it.
I don't necessarily want to see all the results.
Of course,
of their
because
file.
of HIPAA law too. So there's all kinds of issues
all the
related
privacy,
to that.
confidentiality, and stuff. So typically, you want to update your handbook. Make sure that when someone misses a certain amount of days of work, you can require a note clearing them to come back to work for their safety and the safety of others.
Got it. So now, like us and other companies, that people are coming back into the offices.
Yes.
Right. It's not, you still have to social distance. We have to wear masks in certain spaces, and so on. And we're keeping our distance in order to do that. But and you came in wearing your mask, so thank you for that. By the way, and you've got
Unmasked,
it. I got mine.
Yes.
Right.
And there are exceptions for public speaking,
Right.
visually impaired people to understand us and hear us. And
which are important things.
That's right.
But as employers, though,
Yes.
there's a concern on both sides here. There's a concern, I think, on the employers of what's my liability if they don't know. I don't know that you have COVID. You bring it in. You don't know you have COVID. Now 10 of my people have COVID is one side of it. And then we've got the fear factor on the other side of certain employees saying, I don't want to come back into the building, even though my job requires that I'm in the building. What do you do?
I'm seeing both. So first, on the employer liability side, there's a lot of states passing additional laws, but typically the employer liability should be minimal. And when I say that, if someone ever gets injured or sick or hurt at work, that is supposed to be covered by workers' compensation insurance.
Okay.
So if someone dies at work, the employer is not going to go out of business. That's a workers'
It's covered by workers' comp.
That's
So
right.
there's limitations.
So there's limitations. And typically with the flu or a virus or a sickness, it's very hard to prove that solely happened because of their dangerous exposure to a work condition. It could have happened anywhere.
So if one of my employees pick it up, it doesn't mean they picked it up here.
That's right.
They could have picked it up from their buddy that dropped them off at work, or they had a beer last night with somebody and they picked it up there.
Exactly.
So you can't, how do you prove the origin of where it came from?
Right. So I think the liability is going to be more likely if you are grossly negligent.
Okay.
So like when I'm attending various events, you can take someone's temperature and make sure they're under 100, or have someone certify they don't have any symptoms. If you aren't following your COVID plan or doing your mandatory training, which is required throughout Michigan, then you'll be more vulnerable.
Okay, go back. What the hell's a COVID plan?
Exactly. Exactly. That's right. So Governor Whitmer, in one of her orders, requires a business, and there's a different order per industry. So you have to actually go dig through these 100 orders and figure out which order applies to your industry. But typically, all the COVID plans follow one: sanitary, how to hygiene, sanitary, wash hands, personal protective equipment, how to use it. What is your procedure to screen customers and employees when they come and enter the business? And what is your response plan if somebody has COVID or has symptoms? And those are the 4 things that you have to address.
And that's really for any state. I know, Governor, I know ours is a little bit different, but every state has some of those rules in place.
Yeah,
most
the guidelines are definitely out in every state as far as their requirement to have a tailored training to your business. I think it's more rare in Michigan.
Okay. So if I'm an employer, I better have at least some rules around this is what we're doing to mitigate. So when you walk into our building, you have to, if you're a team member, you have to take your temperature. There's a little temperature gun up there, if you want to call it, and you have to test that you felt fine. Blah 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 blah.
That's right.
Is that, given what you know about the law here in Michigan, is that enough to protect me as an employer?
So generally yes. Although you'd be surprised that in Oakland County, for example, each county could have their own requirements. So you want to make sure that you're also, keeping up to date with your website and your own local requirements. And by the way, guidelines are changing. So the CDC used to say 14-day quarantine and make sure you're symptom-free for 72 hours.
Yeah.
Well, just on Monday, they updated their guidance and said only symptom-free for 24 hours.
So I would, based on what because I didn't even know that, to be honest, right? And this is the space that I'm in too, not from a legal perspective. I would suggest that people are asking their attorneys.
I would think that if you're not asking your attorney, how can you possibly keep up with all the changes going on?
So this is this is where I'm going to give a little bit of a pitch to James and the work that you guys do, because your law firm is all across the country.
Yeah, we're doing 50 state surveys daily, keeping up with this.
So if that's entrepreneur, right, that's something that you need, I would suggest that you get a hold of James or one of your counterparts, and at the end,
happy to be a resource.
Yeah, and at the end we'll talk about some of the things that we're doing both free, you and I will be doing, as well as some of the opportunities to use you for real.
And vice versa. Well. I think right now, if leaders are struggling and feel like they're on an island and have no one to talk to,
oh boy,
they can reach out to you and figure out how to get a hold of their team and make them come together.
And that's the other piece to this, because now you've got, the fear of COVID, and you do your legal thing of having them come back, but there's people that are just downright afraid to come back to work. So let's go a little bit further on this COVID, and then I do want to talk about the leadership, but then I want to get into protests,
I do too.
Which is like
Likewise.
a taboo subject
that's
right now.
That's a whole discussion.
But I think it needs to be had because employees are talking about it, employers are concerned about it, the impact and all that. But going back to employees that say, James, I know I have to come into the office, but I'm too afraid to.
I'm treating it as a disability accommodation. So
Okay.
maybe they have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe they have family members that have compromised immune systems. And step one, Governor Whitmer has an order that says you can't retaliate or discriminate against anybody that has a fear of returning into work.
What does retaliation mean?
So to me, it means you can't discipline or fire. So you can accommodate. So maybe an accommodation could be unpaid leave, like unpaid FMLA, to let them recover and be with their family temporarily. However, if they're a rock star remote worker, it could be retaliation by eliminating their ability to work remotely at all if they're fully capable of doing all of the essential job functions.
What if it's a manufacturing facility? Got to do it in my facility.
Yeah.
You call up and say, I'm afraid to come into work. I'm a small business. I have a small manufacturing facility.
Sure.
I can't afford not to operate. I have to go hire somebody else that's going to eliminate your job. Now what?
So in that regard, I would say I'm not retaliating at all against you and your fear. I have to operate my business. So the question is, what would be a reasonable accommodation? So I guess I would talk to that employee. How much time do you need? When would you be comfortable? Would you be comfortable on August 16th if there's no longer a state of emergency? Because
until they have an antidote for this,
so if that was the response, an indefinite return to work date or an indefinitely would not typically be reasonable for many companies, and that could impose an undue hardship. So what you were saying is that manufacturing line can't continue to run.
I can't make any money.
So that could be an undue hardship, and even if that was a disability under the law, you wouldn't have to accommodate it by holding the job open indefinitely.
Okay, so they could try to sue. We're going to go to court probably no matter what.
I would say that first of all, most employers would first go to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So you're not allowed to go to federal court directly.
Okay.
So you have to go through this administrative agency that sometimes takes up to 9 months to try to see if there's a way to resolve the matter or evaluate if there's any evidence of discrimination.
It's navigating.
It's
tough. It's tough to navigate.
That's right.
So you answered. So I had a lot of people that emailed in earlier
Yes.
questions because we had sent out a blast saying, what do you guys want to know? And so you answered the first one. Can I legally ask someone about their exposure to COVID? You talked about that. What about now if somebody travels, say they go on vacation,
Yes.
they're working a few days in the office, they're working a few days at home. Now they go on vacation to Florida where we're seeing an increase.
Yeah.
They come back. Can I let them back in the building or do I have to put them in quarantine?
So I received that question from a client earlier today.
Okay.
And involving Florida.
Yeah.
And what I would typically do is ask them, have you been exposed, to your knowledge, anyone that has COVID? And based on the CDC guidelines, I guess I would feel the temperature of my culture here. Can they work remotely at all? If so, I would want them to work remotely in quarantine. If they can't work remotely at all, I would want to at least make sure they're symptom-free for at least 24 hours before I were to consider bringing them back to work.
Okay.
And I would want to take their temperature prior to them coming back to
So
work.
kind of the same routine I'm doing with anybody coming in, but maybe stay home for 24 hours aside from that, if you have to come in.
You know, that's the most aggressive approach. I think if you have employees that have compromised immune systems or have some fear or paranoia, or it's going to prevent other employees from coming into work, then you may want to consider other options. Maybe have them be on a 14-day quarantine as the most conservative approach.
How much information should leaders be giving to their team members about how they're addressing COVID, how they view COVID, and so on? And does that open the Pandora's box to litigation?
It depends on what you say, right? But as far as more information is better. Our CEO, we have a meeting today this afternoon. We're checking in weekly with everybody because silence, people are assuming the worst.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. I'm glad you said that. Glad you said that.
So that's no doubt. And I think it's good to communicate, but you don't want to identify any names of who got sick or who was exposed. So I think it's good to share information, explain you have a plan, show you have it together. And because in Michigan, you're required to notify your employees of that plan, at least within 2 weeks from when they return to work.
Yeah.
I would encourage open communication.
Yeah, I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago around this leadership during crisis and specifically on COVID. And there were three things that was based on what you just talked about. One is prepare your team that you're viewing everything and what you're looking at, right? So give them I agree, give them the information. And then the second thing I said, make sure you share the consideration. So here's the preparation. We've got issues with COVID, we've got issues with protests, we've got issues with this. Here's some options that we're considering as an organization before you make the decision is what I recommended.
Sure.
And then the third piece was listen to them, because you want to get their feedback. What I've seen too many leaders do right now going through all of this is I'll share information and then I'll share what I'm going to do. I never actually took the time to listen.
That is great advice. That's the training that I had in law school. When you are a litigator, you don't want to tell a jury, convict him, he's guilty. Instead, you want to lay out the facts, ask a few questions, and allow them to feel like they came to the right conclusion on their own, not because I dictated it to them.
That's right.
So the challenge I have that probably applies to most businesses is, as a lawyer, you're typically either what I call a minder, grinder, or finder. That's the slang we use.
I like that.
And but nobody wants to be pigeonholed or forced into one of those categories. So even if you are extremely brilliant and you're into the books and you just like to be kind of quiet on your own getting work done, they still don't want to be excluded from the sales team, being the relationship person. So in a way, I feel like they want an opportunity. What are you interested in? And most of the time they'll say, I love doing the work, and then that's great. But if you never had that conversation, in their mind, they're thinking, why didn't they ask me to be the sales lead of this firm?
Got it. So I got a question that came up online on Facebook Live regarding the flip side to this. So let me read the rest of it. It's still typing.
Nice. This is live.
It is live, which is good. Remote workers.
Yes.
So when you send them remote, do we have to have some kind of plan, policy, or some kind of rules around remote? And then the second piece, this is why it's so darn long, do you have to provide all of the stuff to work remote, not just equipment, furniture, seats, desks, file cabinets?
Right.
Where do you fall on this?
So these are two great questions. Regarding remote work contracts or policies and procedures, legally you're not required to, but I'm not aware of any company that wouldn't. So you definitely need to and want to. The reason why is you could be losing your confidential information. If your clients find out you have no procedures on who can be in the private office and be exposed to things, or can they store our information on a private laptop or a private computer and print out stuff and just leave it around.
Sure.
You need to have procedures in place to protect your brand and protect your quality standards. And you probably also want to make sure they're being productive. You want to make sure there's some threshold where you're making sure people are getting the job done.
We know what expectations are, assigning certain deliverables to all positions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And regarding the second question involving cost of furniture and your computer, et cetera, I even saw people say, what about toilet paper? Companies are saving all this toilet
Coffee
paper
now,
money,
right?
Coffee, all of these things. And the answer is, under the law, you're not required to reimburse employees for business-related expenses unless that failure to reimburse would make them below minimum wage.
Got it.
So you have to figure out what is really business-related, and the cost of their equipment would make them below minimum wage in that 1 7-day work week. Then you would probably want to reimburse them to make sure they're not making less than minimum. Or you want to do it anyway for morale and to make everyone happy.
Sure, but I'm not required to go buy somebody a desk for their home den because they feel it's necessary to.
You're not. And I even get this question at work. The question I used to get at work was, I used to work for Google, and they would give me an ergonomic assessment and find the right lighting and the angle of my computer and desk. I want that at your small mom and pop shop. And I said to the client, well, if they want to stand up, just give them a cardboard box and they can put their monitor and stand up. You don't need to spend $1,000 and get them some, standing desk.
Well, let's take it one step further then.
Yeah.
Let's say that ergonomically their desk that they purchase, that they decide to work at home, causes carpal tunnel now because of the way. Who's responsible for it?
Well, like I said, workplace injuries would be covered by workers' compensation
workers' comp.
insurance. They could apply, but it doesn't mean they're going to win.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Just good questions to have.
Yep.
All right. I want to get to something a little touchy,
Sure.
and we've talked about this
We have.
a little bit as well. We have a lot going on with the protests, with the George Floyd death, and all the subsequent things that have gone, Breonna Taylor and some of these others,
Yes.
that are just unfortunate. Doesn't matter what happened. Doesn't
Tragic.
matter. It sucks.
Yep.
Let's put it out there. But we've got protests in some place going on time after time after time after time. We were talking about some of the. You said something to me that social has almost become the law.
So true.
Explain this this is a big deal. Listen to what I just said. Social has almost become the law. Coming from an attorney,
Yes.
that scares the frickin' daylights out of me.
Yeah.
Tell us more about why you say that.
So the public is boycotting companies that don't have an amazing social media brand.
Yeah.
And if you were to do some racist comment, or you were to take some position on social media, or one of your employees that don't have authority to speak on behalf of the company, I'm seeing stores completely boycotted entirely. So to give you an example, we all saw, I think years ago, United Airlines roughed up a passenger.
Yeah.
The stock, just from the social media damage, not the profits of the company, went down $1 billion. So likewise, I'm seeing the owner of Detroit Popcorn Company.
I saw that.
He made a comment knee to the neck in some context. And as a result, Quicken Loans, the Detroit Zoo, all pulled away all their business, and it had millions of dollars of consequences. So I think that we need to be very careful how to protect the brand, and we should revisit our social media policy, because some employees are being in good faith in their eyes. So to give you an example, someone will post on Facebook, "All lives matter." And if they were to post that, and all lives do matter. We want all humans to be treated fairly. The problem is that if that was posted during a Black Lives Matter protest or at an event, that is kind of interrupting or taking away the cause of their protest. So to give you an example, if somebody was, Dan Russell and I were on a panel a couple weeks ago, and he said if someone was at a breast cancer awareness event, you don't come in and say, all cancer matters. What are you doing? All cancer matters. Or pancreatic cancer matters too. Yes, all cancer does matter. But we don't want to take away from the breast cancer awareness walk or whatever their event is. So I think the context, we got to be aware of how it's being interpreted regardless of your personal intent.
So one of the questions that I got a couple days ago, and I had somebody call me directly prior to this because they didn't want it to be on social that they're asking this question. So I'm going to ask it anyways. And it ties into what you were just talking about.
Yes.
Okay, let's say if I don't support financially, I don't come out in a positive affirmation of breast cancer. It's not that it's just I don't know anybody who had it, so I'm not going to support it.
Right.
I'm not going to come out and verbally say, oh yes, I support it, even though I do. Okay, let's say that's the issue.
Yep.
But it seems today that if you're not saying a positive affirmation statement about that particular, so he said in particular, if I don't come out and say, I support Black Lives Matter, I'm going to get ridiculed.
100% true. So
Is that right?
Right or wrong, I'm more focused on the legal side, but it's creating a lot of debate and a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
So, I'm sitting on the state of Michigan's labor and employment law section.
Okay.
And we did make a statement about, involving the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah.
But have we made a statement affirmatively or anything about LGBTQ or about the Me Too movement that was not too long ago that's still going on? We didn't.
Why?
So, because there wasn't that social media pressure to basically you're accused being a racist or not on board if you don't explain what your current position is. And that social media pressure is real. And we're seeing that if you don't have a statement or your response to employees is, I'm not going to talk about it, that is impacting morale. And when that gets out to the public, you may lose customers.
Is there any legal implications? So if an organization doesn't make a positive statement and an employee feels like they're not treated correctly because the employer is not making that positive statement, is there any basis for any kind of claim?
So, I'm on the employer side,
Yeah,
so
but-
I would say no, but can anyone make a claim?
Sure.
They absolutely can. So employers are not required by law to take a stance on this issue. And almost every employer I know has some policy. We will follow the law as we're an equal opportunity employer.
Of course.
So I'm not aware of anyone taking a position that's against, any legal rights.
So are you, and tell me if you can share this, and if you can't, I get it.
Sure.
But are you recommending to your employers to come out and make a statement in affirmation of BLM?
I am.
Really?
I was also on a panel, and there's a lot of studies shown where if you say I'm colorblind, just focused on, like you said, focus on performance and results, which I love. If you ignore someone's gender, you ignore someone's color, that is hurting the morale of those individuals. They want to be acknowledged for who they are and be accepted for who they are, and then focus on performance. They don't want to, for example, during the weeks leading up to when those videos were released, there were a lot of employees that were suffering. They were crying daily, they were praying, they were going on walks. Their whole family and them were challenged. And I think if we were to ignore that and assume our employees are just focus on the job and not at all treat them like a human and the pain that they're going through, I think that we are hurting an opportunity to improve our morale and our relationships with our employees.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point that I was leading part of my team through some leadership training yesterday morning. We do these every week. And we were talking about what leadership really is and is not. And I think this ties into what you're just talking about. And if you think about it, leadership, it comes in levels, right? Mm-hmm. So for the most simplest form of leadership is my title is bigger than yours, so I get to tell you what to do. Right. It's like the simplest form, but you have to start somewhere. You get promoted in that first job. But in order to go to that next level, it's all based on relationship. The only way you can influence somebody in a positive and or negative way, and mostly in a positive way, is if you actually have a personal relationship with them, knowing what makes them tick, having some empathy for the pain they feel. I can't have sympathy for somebody when I don't know what they feel, but I can definitely have empathy because I've never been through it myself. Right. So I think that is fair. But I want to ask kind of the flip side of this. And this was another comment that I got.
Yeah,
right? Again,
sure.
Because it's a touchy subject.
It's very touchy.
People aren't putting their names out there. They're just saying, can you ask the attorney this question?
Yes,
right?
I understand.
So you've got people coming out in affirmation of BLM. You've got statements saying we care for our folks of different ethnicities and so on. Mm-hmm. But what about the people that are saying, okay, you're taking care of all of them, but now you're forgetting about me? Meaning a middle-aged white male and a middle-aged white female, who these two people are. Right. They asked me this question. What happens in there? What's the issue?
So that's where I also want to train employers. Quotas are illegal. And I do see a lot of recruiters saying, hire someone that is committed to diversity. Like wink, wink, only hire someone that's black. We need to have more diversity. Hire only women for the next 5 executive jobs. That is illegal. Quotas are purely illegal.
Anywhere in the country or just Michigan?
Anywhere in the country.
Okay, that's done.
That's federal law.
Okay.
Quotas are illegal.
Okay.
So what you can do is make sure you're getting a diverse pool of candidates and then focus on who's the most qualified.
Okay,
but
wait a second. What is, if quotas are illegal, making sure you have a slate of diverse candidates, what does that mean?
So there are some studies that 86% of executive jobs are filled through word of mouth.
Yeah.
And if you're in a neighborhood where everyone is a white and you're only surrounded by white males through your other social events, there's an 86% less chance a minority or maybe even a woman is going to get aware of that position.
Yeah.
So the concept is start making sure that you're applying in a neutral place where you can get a wide range of talent applying for that position.
But is there anything wrong with going to places that are not just neutral, but that have a higher propensity of people that, because we like to hire people that look like us. Yeah. And I have this conversation with hiring, what you just said all the time.
Sure.
We're comfortable with somebody who looks like us, has the same experiences as us, and you don't even have to be racist to do that. We're just naturally precluded to that, which we want to get people away from. Yeah. We want you to look for people that can do the job no matter what background, where they come from. And we know there's enough stats around it people with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different group. If you bring them together, they're more creative together
Right.
than you and I that look the same, have the you have more education than I do, but you get it.
We don't want all these yes men. Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes. Right.
Yeah. So, but then isn't it okay to say, okay, let's go where we know more people of diversity are? Is there any legal issue to that? Not just neutral, but proactive.
So I think there's a misnomer of what does diversity even mean.
Okay.
And I loved what you said, different perspectives, different styles, thoughts, ideas. That to me is diversity. Diversity is not just gender and race.
So just because I'm a female doesn't necessarily mean diversity only.
Exactly.
Just because I'm black doesn't mean diversity only. It's a
Right.
component, but not only.
It means not mirror images of us coming together as a team and making the best healthy conflict. Challenge each other through different perspectives, ideas. Some people are visual learners. Some people like to...
Absolutely.
Right? So I think you got to have these type A personalities, type B, all these different styles, because let's face it, if we had 20 alpha dogs, quarterbacks all in the same room, it's not going to work out.
No.
You need the team.
Yeah.
So I do think that you're right. There is a business bottom line argument supporting diversity.
Yeah.
But in addition, let's say that you have only one female or only one minority at your company, and you take an adverse action against them. You lay them off, you pay them less, demotion. They're going to naturally feel
Singled out.
Was that because of my race, because of my gender? So if you have diverse leadership, when someone is laid off, it's going to make them more likely to be accountable. Maybe it's because they're not performing as well as they need to be performing, because maybe the leader is the same race or gender as the person being disciplined.
I hate to even say this, but I've had a number of clients that have said, I need to fire this person, but I can't because they're...
Right.
How are you? And I get the legal side of that, or how that,
Yeah.
and even the non-legal, how that makes that person feel. But then you're setting up that person for failure in the future because they're not able to deal with whatever shortfall they were coming. So sometimes it's best for that they move on.
Agreed. No, the concept of no good deed goes unpunished comes to light a lot of the time.
Yeah.
What I would want to do in that scenario is no longer make you the sole decision maker in letting that person go. I would want to have an executive committee or have some type of committee that hopefully is somewhat diverse and focus on the job related reasons. And if everyone would agree that these job related reasons are not up to our standards, we need to let that person go. They should be let or trained if they have that potential.
Because if you don't, that ultimately kills morale internally as well. And it's this. And I know people are balancing. Okay, if I fire them, I might have a lawsuit, but I'm going to have internal morale issues. What's the bigger negative?
So there is employment practices liability insurance that could also cover those claims.
Yeah.
But I think that if you're the same person that hired that person and are also the same person firing them, it's not like you didn't know their race or their sex when you hired them most of the time, right?
Yep.
So for them to claim that's the reason why would not be a good faith claim under most scenarios. The problem is when you have new leaders, for your business, you help elevate leaders a lot of the time. When you have a new sheriff in town and they want to hold their team accountable and to have some changes, that's when the company is the most exposed.
Sure.
And the other issue I'm seeing is Governor Whitmer just passed an order in July, I think it was July 16th, that said all healthcare facilities in Michigan need to have unbiased diversity and inclusion training because they believe that it's proven minorities are having more complications with COVID than white males.
Yeah.
And is it possibly because they're not getting as good of healthcare treatment or some of the employees are not giving them as much attention as other patients? So that's a whole kind of new
That's
era.
touchy, boy.
Very touchy to mandate it.
Yeah.
But I am a fan of we should make our unconscious subjectives more conscious. And I think you do that a lot with your leadership.
We do.
And I do that a lot with identifying the legal issues to make them more self-aware.
Yeah, I think it's tough to say. I don't think anybody can rightly say, I'm 100% unbiased.
Right. No, everyone is biased.
I use this, it's a simple analogy, but if you let's say there was a group picture taken of us all,
Right.
and you go to look at that picture, who's the first person you look at? Yourself.
Definitely.
You're
Always
always going to
myself.
look at yourself
Always myself.
first, right?
Right.
And if the picture looks good, you're going to say it's a great picture, even though everybody else has their eyes shut
That's a
and
great
everything
point.
else. We have a natural affinity towards ourselves. We just do.
We do.
And if there's something different, doesn't mean we're racist, but we're definitely biased.
No, yeah, another example is I'm at gym class. You have to pick who's on your team. You're definitely taking into various things and making that selection.
If I'm playing basketball, am I
Right.
picking the 7-footer or the 3-footer?
Exactly.
I'm picking the 7-footer because I want to win.
That's right.
But in the space of selection of employees, this is why we're trying to get our employers that we work with to focus on the results.
Yep.
Can they achieve results? And it's almost like The Voice. Right?
Yeah.
You think about The Voice, right? You can't see the person singing.
That's
You
right.
have to select them based on their ability.
Right.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
That's awesome. And by the way, that's a great point. So more lawsuits are happening because these interviews are happening online. Video. And you may see, depending on where that person is, how wealthy they are based on the background. If they're religious, are there any icons? Does their kid walk by? Are they married or single based on pictures?
Sure.
You can know them at a different level. None of that is supposed to be taken into account in making a hiring decision. So what you should do is write down the job-related information you get. Don't ever write down age, gender, all the other stuff. And then have a committee that gets together and all evaluates the job-related information. It helps you make that selection to minimize your unconscious bias coming into account, because you can find out on LinkedIn who viewed your profile.
Yeah.
What if your profile...
Unless you're going anonymous. You can go anonymous.
I didn't even know that.
Yes,
I
you
learned,
can.
I learned something new today. So if you're not going anonymous, you might be able to find out if they're affiliated with some organization that shows their race or their sexual orientation or religion.
Oh, yeah.
And how can you prove you didn't take that into account? So you need to have that committee at this stage.
And it's all based on job-related results. And I agree with that. I train recruiters all across the U.S. and I was sitting with a group of 40 recruiters with a large client, a name you would know, and I was observing what they were doing. And they're on LinkedIn, which I think is a great tool, but a little overused at times. And I could see as they're sourcing is, who am I going to call on LinkedIn? They're clicking through and discounting people. Who I looked at their profiles and it's like, why would you discount it? And I saw the trend. And unfortunately, in that particular case, my belief, it could be wrong, my belief is they were discounting all women.
Yeah, there are studies that have shown, various things, depending on how the name sounds, maybe excluding a certain race.
Yeah.
Depending on if they disclose they're gay, then that could be excluded. There is all of those results.
That, if we would just focus on the results, not on looks, I love that voice analogy. I wish we could hire people by not seeing them, but I know it's difficult to assess them when you don't see them.
You're right. And what's interesting is that there's also a legal theory called disparate impact.
What's that?
So even if your policy is neutral, I'm going to discriminate against anyone that has marijuana in their system that's legal, or anyone that has a misdemeanor conviction, and it turns out that just excluded 90% of a certain race, that would be a disparate impact. And if that's not job related, if it doesn't matter at all, if you have other employees that all have misdemeanor convictions or they weren't ever drug tested, your neutral policy had an impact of discriminating. And that could also come to bite a company, especially if those rules have nothing to do with the job.
So I'm seeing a trend here, right?
Yes.
I mean, as things like this continue to occur, companies really need to be cautious about the law as it's like. I didn't even know about disparate impact, right? I mean, employers really got to think about some of these things. HR professionals need to have somebody like you on their side.
It's great to. I think HR professionals have too much pressure on their shoulders. They got to be the COVID expert, the legal expert. They got to do everything, and for them to be an expert at everything, it's impossible.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I know you're pretty involved in the local SHRM chapter here for that particular reason, and a lot of your practice is around HR related.
And even myself,
issues.
I ask my other attorneys various things. That we all have our certain specialties.
Yeah, so this is a great lead into one of the things that you and I have talked about doing and offering. So things like this, where we get into subjects, and you're technically giving out a little bit of free legal advice too, at least your opinions on these things. we've agreed that we're going to do this on a monthly basis
Yes.
to answer whether you're an HR exec, whether you're a business exec, but it's probably a little heavy on the HR side. And we're going to do this thing called Leaders and Legal, or Leadership and Legal. So we'll be doing this once a month. We'll put out a bunch of articles and a bunch of stuff on social on when it's going to be, and it'll be a live session like this where you can answer questions, I can answer questions around the leadership side of things. So that's number one. And number two, specifically, I think HR sometimes gets a bad rap because there's so much on their shoulders, and there's a lot to discuss. But it's nobody wants to discuss this stuff online because it can get hijacked in the wrong way. And the intent is good, but unfortunately sometimes it's viewed as being negative. So one of the other things that we're going to be doing is a private group that we're going to start accepting applications for senior HR leaders, where we can come together, or you can come together, and James will be a resource, I'll be a resource. I think it makes sense to bring other resources in to this as well.
Oh, absolutely. As you saw today, people are afraid to ask questions live, right? We need to have a more intimate group where I want to hear what they're dealing with and have it more of an interactive dialogue.
In those couple of questions that I asked you, I had about 20 or 30 of the same question that they just don't want to make public. But anyways, we're going to create a private place for you guys to come. We've already got it. There's an app that you can download. If you're interested, if you're an HR leader and you really want to talk about things that are important with your peers, to get some advice from James, to get some advice from me and others that we're going to screen to bring to the table that provide
It'll be
real
an executive
value.
roundtable. Right.
Yeah, but so send myself an email. It's slowisz@qualigence.com, or James, yours.
Yeah, James.Reid at dinsmore.com.
Yeah, get to us. We're going to start applications on Monday. We'll have a conversation with you to make sure it's the right fit for you. Bring that together. There'll be some there'll be a freemium version, and then there'll be a premium version of this as well, depending on what we're actually doing. But more information on that will follow, because these are topics that we got to address.
Right.
And we need the right group to address them appropriately. It's good for the organizations. It's good for the team members, and so forth.
And we just need open dialogue. Sometimes it has to just be Q&A, what's on your mind.
Yeah, and I don't think we do that enough. And we don't want to do it on open social, again, because it'll bite us, so we'll do it in a private network. We've created an app just for that. So we'll be launching more of that, and more information to follow. It'll be on our website. We'll get it out on your social profile.
Great.
And all of that. I mean, we spent 53 minutes here, James, talking about a number of pretty hot topics, and I think we agree on most. I mean, I'm not an attorney, so I always kind of look at attorneys sheepishly and say, I get what you're trying to do. I think you're full of crap. I didn't say that to you at all today.
And I think that about leadership.
I know.
I think these words sound so amazing and motivated, but what do I do?
Yeah, I think that's these things go when we're dealing specifically with COVID and the protests. We've got the legal side, we've got the leadership side, and those have got to come together.
They got it.
Because if they don't, we're not going to fix any of the problems.
And I think we need to work together, because leadership training, attorney review, HR, we're all viewed as a cost expense at a company, and they don't see us as a ROI, or actually able to minimize lawsuits, motivate better workers. They don't see us as making the company money, and we got to change that whole image.
Yeah, you said something. They don't see us as minimizing. I think we can really focus on, it's not just minimizing, it actually is, how do we get, I do this series online called P3, People, Performance, Profits.
Yes.
HR and legal actually support people. They support the performance of the business, which drives the profits of the business, which allows us to hire more people. And there's all kinds of positives to this, but I agree with you.
Right.
HR, expense.
Yeah.
Legal, no way.
No way. No, those companies in 2008, as we spoke about, that cut their training expenses to try to save money, look at them now. They lost all their leadership. It's a mess. It didn't work out. So I think now, during COVID, when people are looking at their budgets, getting rid of their training, it would be the worst thing to do.
And for anybody watching this, I don't think there's a topic that you and I are not willing to touch.
We're open book.
Even if it's a controversial topic, like I don't necessarily agree with everything going on and what you have to do because social's forcing you to do it. I think there's some of that you need to support in the right way, but it's almost like we're getting suckered into having to say certain things. I think that's crappy across the board, no matter what your position is.
It's making people less authentic.
If
people are being fake, people can read that, and it's eventually going to catch up to companies.
And that's why I like this conversation, because it's like, look, here's what I think, here's the legal opinion. Here's might be my opinion. I may not agree with it. You may not agree with me. That's what we need to do.
Right.
You know Terry Bean, right?
I do.
Terry and I were on his boat a week ago. Actually, we were recording some stuff, and we had the same conversation about the public discourse is just not there. It's if we disagree on something, you're a jerk and I'm not, and you're thinking I'm a jerk and you're not. We don't have to agree on everything.
No, and what's even crazier, we can disagree and both be right.
Right.
Now there are so many laws, they're overlapping and conflicting. So what's next on the Supreme Court kind of horizon is there are all these ministerial rights and religious rights, and how does that going to intersect with everything else? There's a lot more.
But employers in HR need to know that.
They need to know that. They need to see not only the issues in front of them, but what's coming in the future.
Yeah, so I know people are going to have questions. They're going to be thinking how to reach out to you. Give everybody your contact information so everybody knows beyond
Yeah,
your email.
we'll also post it on social media, but James.Reid at dinsmore.com. And I'm also an open book. Feel free to call me. I actually have my phone number out there, 734-649-1313.
And I learned that from you.
Yes.
So I mean, my number's been out there if you look for it. But I actually saw you at one of the Michigan Bankers where you did that.
I did that.
So I do the exact same thing at every event now.
It's the best. So I did this at SHRM when I was the keynote last year, and I literally received 300 texts, and I didn't have any of the names affiliated with the number. So it's the same thing as anonymous tips and information and questions, and I responded to all of them. So feel free to shoot me a text message.
I did a webinar just a couple of weeks ago, and I put my cell phone number, and I started getting these. Is this really your personal cell phone number? And I'm like, yeah, here it is. And it did the same. The questions that came out of that, most of them ended up becoming non-anonymous. They wanted to connect at that point.
Same.
But it gives the opportunity to do that. So mine's 734-837-8500. It's just about everywhere, and it's Lowisz at Qualigence.com, Lowisz. Like this has been good. I think this has been a great start to talk about some real issues. We'll eventually have more people taking a look at all this, but we hit some pretty decent topics.
Oh, I think we were not afraid to touch anything.
They're not going to go away.
No.
We're going to be talking about them again in a couple of weeks when we do this again, and then there'll be other issues that we're going to have to deal with as well. So.
And new issues are always popping up, and I want to hear everyone else's perspective as well.
That's going to be the key. I think we need to be cognizant of the fact, though, that we're going to have a lot of people that want to be anonymous. If you do, continue to send an email to James, send an email to me. We won't mention your name. Promise you that.
Yep.
If you're okay with being open about your question, you can post it on either your social profile,
Absolutely.
the Qualigence social profiles, or on the Steve Lowisz social profiles. Any of them. We'll keep putting those all together. We'll save them up for our next event, and we'll have some more dialogue.
And if this was helpful, do a comment, spread the word, because we want to make sure we're getting a lot of the best leaders part of this organization.
Well, and they're getting a little bit of free legal advice on some of this.
And leadership advice.
Thank you, and then can continue to get more with you if they have some questions. I use James for some things as well too, which has been awesome. So I mean, from a legal perspective,
and I
it's
love
been
it.
great.
I saw you speak, and you were motivating in two different forums.
No, I
both
appreciate that.
The bankers and the SHRM forum.
Yeah,
So
different groups.
completely different groups. And I can vouch that if someone needs to have that motivation or that why to why they're doing that grind, you're great at bringing that out.
Inspiration, I hope, is more than motivation, but we'll go. Well, that's for a different.
That play on words you can explain during our next event.
I figured a lawyer might appreciate that play on words. Yep. Listen, thank you all for joining us. This really was our first true Qualigence Live with a guest. James, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
But now we're turning it from guests to an ongoing thing. So I'm excited about this. To be able to do it with you.
This is the launch of the new normal, so I'm excited about having this team together.
I think it's awesome. And if you're a practitioner somewhere around HR, a service provider where you're not afraid like us to give some free advice to folks, reach out to James or I. There are people that could use your advice. We'll have a conversation with you, see if we can broaden our team a little bit and bring some real experts together just beyond the two of us. I think would be awesome.
Always welcome another perspective.
All right.